So I know Gervais sent to you guys almost a Regal style vise. I have over here a Renzetti system. What a vise does is that it holds your hook, and that's all it needs to do in the end. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Some people start off with vice grips or pliers, but you guys are off to a good start with your vise. So Gervais, their vise is spring loaded, right? So
yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So my system's a little different, but I'll show you how yours works with yours. So you have your handle here at the bottom of your vise that you can move around. When you press down on it, you'll open the jaws of your vise. And then when you press down on it, you open the jaws of your vise, you insert your hook, and then you release, and it'll close onto your hook. And then that's how the vise works. As for adjustments, I typically like to be sitting just above my vise, with the vise near to around my chest. I don't like to have it too high because then your arms are all the way up here, and I don't like to have it too low so I'm not hunched over it. As you go on, you'll find a position that works well for you, and it's important to be able to enjoy fly tying, right? You don't want to sit down after a session and then have your back aching. So I think, Raul, I think you have a very good position for your vise right there. Looks great. Yeah, and so there's also different styles of vices. We have clamp style vices and we have pedestal style vices. So this is a pedestal style vice where this is weighted platform and it keeps the vice steady. Other ones clamp onto the side of the desk. They just have a C clamp. But as long as your vice isn't moving while you're tying, you'll be fine. They all do the same thing. They hold your hook, and that's all they need to do. Awesome. So let's get into the tools that we will be using. First up, we have scissors. What's special about fly tying scissors is you'll notice that they have this super sharp point, right? So what this super sharp point allows us to do is to get in really close. When we're tying small flies, we can get in really close and cut sharp without leaving much of a tag end, right? Another thing that you'll notice about scissors is that these tips are super, super fine. The blades are thin at the tip. Scissors are basically limited as to how close they can cut by the length of one of their blades. As you can imagine, I can't get much closer to cut than that, right? So they have really fine tips at the end, and they meet very closely to allow you to make clean cuts. So those are your scissors. Other than that, nothing special. They're just scissors. Pick up a nice pair if you can. What's a little bit more specialized here is our bobbin. So this is called a bobbin. And the principle of fly tying is tying feathers and fur onto a hook. So as you imagine, you might need something to hold your thread, right? So let me grab a thicker thread to demonstrate. So this is just some fluorescent orange for you guys to see. Let's go over the bobbin first. Look at the anatomy first. So we have our tube here. The tube holds our thread. We hold our bobbin here, and then our fingers just wrap around like there. Then at the bottom of the bobbin, we have these two knobs, okay? And these two knobs are connected to two arms. And these arms are made out of some flexible wire, flexible metal. So you can actually pinch them in so they're closer together. And then what this does, as you can imagine, if you have a spool of thread here, it increases the tension that you're putting on the spool, right? If it's tighter together, and therefore the thread will be less likely to slip out, right? At the same time, inversely, you could also spread the arms out a little bit, gently, as to not damage. And as you can see now, they're a little bit wider apart, right? So then now this will be a bit looser for the thread. And then, so you want to set it at a little bit of a sweet spot. You can find your own, but just have it here for now. And I'll talk about how you can put the thread through now. So I'm going to use a bit of a bigger bobbin to show you. This is the same thing, just a little bit of a different design, designed by Loon. Same thing, flexible arms you can squeeze in to tighten or pull out to loosen. Squeeze in. And so that's the bobbin. Another tool that you will have is a bobbin threader. So mine looks a little bit different than yours. Yours will have a black handle, I'd imagine, and a thin wire at the top. You're going to need three things: your bobbin threader, your bobbin, and a spool of thread. So this is our bobbin threader, right? Then we're going to insert it from the front end through, all the way through to the end. So now we have the bobbin threader coming out the end. Everyone see that? Everyone okay with that step? Okay, perfect. So now we're going to take the end of our thread over here in our hand. I'm just going to lick it to slim down the fray ends. And then, so at this wire, right, it's doubled over and there's a gap between the two wires, right? There's a gap between the two wires, right? I exaggerated it for you, but we're just going to stick the thread through the loop so that the wire is holding onto the thread. Just stick it through, right? And then what we're going to do is we're just going to pull this wire through. Everyone okay with that? And then we're going to pull it all the way through. And then just like that, we threaded the bobbin. So that's the bobbin threader, okay? Another technique that you can use, an easier technique, might I add, is you have your thread here, you have your bobbin here, you just insert it a bit in, you insert it in, look at this end of the tooth, just give it a quick suck. And just like that, you started your thread like that, right? So that's also a useful tip that you can use. Then we have our thread started. We take our spool of thread and we insert it on the two knobs of the bobbin. Oops. Make sure you don't catch it on the arm of the bobbin. Just like that. Okay, just like that. Yeah, so you see how it's hanging here? I'm holding it and it's hanging just like that. That's a good tension. It's not too tight. I can pull it out and it's still letting thread out nicely without too much force. If it's too loose, it'll just fall down to the bottom because the arms aren't tight enough, right? And that, sorry, excuse me. If your if your bobbin is just falling down, tighten up the arms a bit. Pull out the thread, give it a good little squeeze, throw it back in. This might be a little too tight now, and it should hold. But if it's too tight, then when you're wrapping, it's going to be really hard to pull out, right? And then you might have to put too much force. And one very annoying thing that you'll deal with in fly tying is your thread breaking. And that happens to me quite often. But an easy way to avoid that is to make sure that your bobbin arms aren't too tight. Now we'll move on to a bodkin. So what you will have received is a needle looking thing with a handle on it. Now, I also don't have a bodkin. You might be wondering, how the heck do I tie flies without all of these tools? That's the beauty of fly tying. You can improvise. This is a sewing needle. And I'll cover the use of the bodkin a little later while we're tying the fly. But the main use of it is it's a really multi-purpose tool. It's small. You can dab on a little bit of glue onto your fly if you need it. It's precise. It can pick things out if you need it to. It's just a real all-purpose tool. Yeah. So a bodkin is just a needle with a handle. Be careful with it. These things are very sharp. Next up would be your whip finisher. So whip finisher is this tool. So it's this funky looking piece of wire that spins around and usually has a chisel at the bottom. Some people like to use those in place of the scissors to cut the thread, but I'd much rather just use the scissors. And I'll cover how to use this now. So I'm going to take my hook, just any type of hook that you have will do for now. And then I'm going to put it in the vise and secure it. So is everyone okay with that step? Everything in focus? Now I'm going to teach you another skill before we do the whip finish, okay? Before I show you how to use that wiggly, squiggly tool. So I'm going to tell you how to start your thread on the hook. You might be wondering, how the heck do I get this end to stay, right? So I'm going to grab it with my left hand or my non-dominant hand. I'm going to go behind the hook, pull against, and then just start wrapping over this tag end. I'm going to angle the tag end so that I'm sliding the thread wraps beside each other. I'll zoom in for you. Oops. Everything still clear?
Yep.
Okay, good. Now I'm just going to angle this thread and then I'm going to start wrapping all the way down. this is how you start your thread base. So what this does, it establishes a thread base. The thread is a little bit more grippy, so when you're tying things down, they're less likely to roll around on the shank of the hook. Metal is pretty slippery. If you're just trying to tie things down onto the bare shank, they'll have a tendency to slip. So now that we have this tag end, right, we can come in with our scissors and just snip it off. Some people can break it off with the thinner thread, but I prefer just snipping it off like that. So now I'm going to zoom back out so you can see everything. Just as we talked about bobbin tension earlier, my bobbin's holding here fine. The tension is great. And yeah, so this is how your bobbin should sit. It's not flying down, not too tight when I'm wrapping. Overall, good. So now I'm just gonna, I haven't tied anything on yet, but I just want to cover how to do the whip finish while I have the tool with you before we tie the fly. So I'm gonna hold the bobbin in my left hand, and I'm gonna hold the whip finisher in my right hand. I'm right-handed, keep in mind. Everything will be flipped if you're left-handed. I'm going to give myself approximately a couple inches of line to work with, or thread to work with. And we're going to talk about the anatomy of the whip finisher. So we have a hook at the top, and we have an indent at the bottom. So what we're going to do, holding it in this orientation, we're going to come with the hook under the thread, grab it, and then we're going to take the thread and wrap it around the indent. So I'll demonstrate that again, okay? We're going to come up with the hook and wrap around the indent, okay? Then we're going to move this whole assembly close to the hook. So nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Oops. Up, wrap, up. Nothing has changed. And then now we're going to bring our bobbin so the thread is parallel to the shank of the hook, parallel to the straight part of the hook, okay? Now we formed a bit of a right angle triangle. We're just going to push. Oops, I can't. We're just going to push and rotate our whip finisher. So up, around, bring it up there, right angle triangle, and rotate. So as you can see here, it's tying a knot, right? It's tying a knot. And this is how we finish our flies. Because when we finish our flies, then we don't want the knot to slip out. I'm going to go over what I did there at the end, okay? So same thing, up, around, wrap, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 to 8 works well. Now we're in this position again, right? We're going to bring the whip finisher up to slide it off at the indent. We want the thread to slide off the indent. That's why it's shaped like that, so the thread can slide off, right? Now we just have it, because it slide off the indent now, it's just attached at the hook. We're going to pull with our bobbin hand, and that will bring our hook closer down. And the reason why the hook is shaped like that is so that we can slide it out. So that's how you finish your whip finish. Another good tip is we don't want to have too much line out of the, we don't want to have too much thread out of the end of our bobbin, because this is a little bit difficult to deal with, right? And so what we want to do is we want to try to keep our working distance of thread relatively short. I would keep it around 3/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch, nothing longer than that, just to work with. And we want to keep this distance from the tip of our bobbin to the hook as consistent as possible. So we don't want to wrap all the way down to the hook and then yank more thread out and then continue wrapping, right? So what happens there is you get inconsistent tension on the hook. If we keep the distance consistent, then we're wrapping with consistent tension on the thread, right? And then things won't slip out. So that's a good tip. Try to keep that distance as consistent as possible from tip of the bobbin to hook. So the next thing would be your hackle pliers. There's a lot of different designs of hackle pliers. They all do the same thing. It's just a little thing for you to hold on to stuff. I can hold on to my hook right now. You never really do that usually. But the purpose of these hackle pliers is to hold on to small things. So when we're tying flies like this, there's a lot of small materials, right? And the hackle pliers allow us to hold on to things and give us a handle to wrap with them. so our big clunky fingers don't get caught up there, right? You can imagine how those would be helpful. They're similar to tweezers, but they hold things and they stay there. So this is head cement. It's basically super glue. You could use super glue in place of it, but how you use it is with the Bodkin, with the needle device that I showed you earlier. So we have this. I like to bring the brush up and just brush the needle a bit. And then now I have a bit of glue. There's a bit of glue on my needle. So what I'll do is I'll bring it up to my hook when we're finishing our fly. I just dab a little bit of that on the head on the whip finish, and then that will prevent the Rapsis thread and the knot from coming undone ever. So I'm just going to talk about. I want you to familiarize yourself with these terms. They're pretty intuitive. I mentioned the shank before, as you might have heard. It's this straight portion of the hook, and then usually with flies, unless we want to tie a curved fly, we will stop at the start of the bend of the hook. So we only want to tie on the straight part primarily. And that's the bend of the hook. And the barb is just a small piece of metal that sticks out from the point of the hook to prevent you from losing fish if you lose tension. The point of the hook, the eye of the hook. These are all terms that I'll be using. I'm using a size 8 streamer hook. So what you'll notice about these hooks, you see this designation right now, 2XH, 4XL. That means that it's 2 times extra heavy. That's referring to the diameter of the wire. And the 4XL, extra long, is referring to the length of the hook or the shank of the hook. So as for comparison, I have a ridiculous hook over here. That's 3XH. That means it's slightly heavier than my 2XH, heavier gauge wire for the hook. And this one is also 7XL. So it's a lot longer of the shank, and you can tell that, right? So this is just the designations that we use when we're talking about traditional hooks like this. So I'm going to start with a streamer hook. This is a really good hook to start off with your woolly bugger, 2 extra heavy, 4 extra long, Mustad R74. Fishing hook sizes, the smaller they get, the bigger they are when they're numbers without the /0 designation. So this size 8 hook, size 8 would be bigger than a size 10. So the smaller the number, the bigger the hook. So size 8, bigger than a size 10. A bead or a conehead is basically the same thing. They're just different shapes. So I have a package of coneheads here. Same thing as a bead. I just don't have a big enough bead to fit over this hook because I tie a lot of small flies. I'm going to take a conehead out of there.
So what it does, actually, that beads or the coneheads will add weight at the end of your fly. So your fly will be going down instead to be leveled. She will be going down with an angle. Go ahead.
Yeah. So how we're going to do this is we're going to take our hook out of the vise, right? Now we're just going to, there's 2 ends of this conehead, if I can show it to you. Shoot.
Same for the beads. You got the 2 holes, like you got a big hole and a small hole. Okay.
So what you want to do is you want to put the hook point through the small hole.
Yeah.
I'll show you. So we have the small hole here, right? So this is a small hole. We're going to want to take our hook point and put it through the small hole and then slide it up. So that way it's sitting up like that. The purpose of the cone and the lead wire that you're wrapping, or lead-free wire if you so choose, is it's supposed to add weight to the fly. So this is how you use it. So this is, the wire serves two purposes. It's going to stabilize this bead, butt it up against the head of the hook, and it's also going to add some weight. So we're just going to take it's like wrapping the thread, and we're just going to wrap, instead of wrapping over the tag end, we're just going to wrap up. I wrapped 8 wraps. 8 wraps is good. So once we wrap that wire up, a nice neat trick with wire is instead of using your scissors to cut this, because it will dull your scissors, because metal cutting metal, right? Metal is really hard. So what we can do is we can just helicopter it off. Just twist it, and it will break off like that. And it breaks off really nice and clean. But we also have this pesky tag end to deal with right now. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to push all this wire up against the cone. Push all the wire up against the cone. So I've compacted those wraps of lead wire, and now they're stabilizing the cone. So now what we're going to do is we're going to brace it with our thumb, and we're just going to helicopter the bottom off.
Or you can wrap it back onto the shank as well.
Yeah, you could also wrap it back. Yes. So now we have our lead wire and our cone. Everyone okay with that? Perfect. Good stuff. Good stuff. So then now we're just going to start our thread. You're going to want to use a medium thickness thread. So Jamie, do you know which types of thread that they got? The 80, the /0 designation is also referred to aught. So I refer to this as 8/0 or 8/0. This is a really good overall thread for tying on a size of hook like this. Of course, as you tie with smaller flies, you might need thinner wire thread. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start our thread, because earlier we started it up at the top of the eye, we're going to start our thread behind the lead wire. And we're just going to take wraps over our tag end all the way back. We're going to cut off the tag end. And just like that, we've attached our thread. So then now what we can do is we can wrap our thread up and over these wire wraps. What this will do is it will make sure that the wire wraps stay where they are. Wrap it back and over the wire wraps and return your thread back to the start of the bend with the hook, right there. I just realized this is not straight in the vise. So now we're going to tie in our first material. This is a really, really versatile material. So it's strung marabou or blood quill marabou or woolly bugger marabou that you might have it. Just any type of marabou. I'm going to be tying this fly in black. You can tie it in olive, in brown, all sorts of different colors. They come like this. They're all attached at the bottom with some string to each other. And I'm just going to pick a nice full feather. Something like this. Just pluck out a feather like that. So from this clump of feathers, they're all attached. Just go through it, isolate one, and pluck it out. So this one's actually not that great of a feather. You could definitely tie a fly with it, but its tips are like all broken and everything. This is a much better feather. It's more full. Yeah. All right. A regular feather. I'm going to stroke all the fibers to the front. Stroke it to the front. And then what you'll notice about these tips is that they're super, super stringy, right? This might be, some people might like it like that. I prefer a more dense tail. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a regular old pair of scissors. You could use your tying scissors that you have, keeping them closed. I'm just going to pull it up, brace with my thumb, and break it there. So I just broke off the tips of the marabou just by pulling it there. So this leaves a more dense tail for you. So as you might have been able to see earlier, those tips were really stringy, but when I tie in my tail now, it's going to be nice and dense, like that. I got rid of the stringy tips. This is a step that you could omit. I just like to include it because I think it ties better flies. We're going to stroke all our fibers to the back, and we're going to measure out a tail approximately 1.5 times the hook shank in length. So right there is about good. And we're going to shift it back to the end of the hook. So I have it measuring out here, and then I put it back here. So everything's still in my dominant hand right now. I'm just pinching the feather at the back of the hook. Now I need my right hand to hold this thread, right? So I'm going to take my left hand and just hold it. Switch hands. So now I'm going to do what's called a pinch wrap, okay? This is a really useful technique. So I'm going to show you what happens if I don't use a pinch wrap, okay? If I go forward and I just wrap it, look what happens. The marabou just spins around the shank, right? And that's not what we want. We want it to be secured on top of the shank. So I'm going to get back to the positions where you guys are right now, holding it like this. I'm going to bring my thread up, pinch it in my fingers, and bring it around, and then I'm going to pull up once I'm here, using my fingers bracing it to prevent the marabou from twisting around. Then I'm just going to take a few wraps to secure the marabou, just a few securing wraps. And I'm using my fingers to brace the marabou so it doesn't twist away from me, because it has a tendency to do that because that's the direction I'm wrapping my thread in. I'm using my left-hand finger to brace it, and I'm just wrapping. Okay, so now we have our scissors in hand, and we're just going to take this tag end of marabou, this ugly tag end, and we're just going to come to the base. There we go, perfect. So now I just got all this fluff here, right? I'm just going to put my thread over it a couple times. That'll help manage it. Take that fluff down a bit. Just wrapping the thread over and over it. So our next material is chenille. So we're just going to cut approximately a 6-inch strand off, just enough for us to work with. You can make a couple flies with this. Just use your scissors, cut a 6-inch strand off. So we have this chenille now, right? We're going to pull it to one end, just like that. To one end that we cut, right? Pinch it against the hook shank. So I have it pinched like this. I'm just going to pinch it against the hook shank so it's nice and close. And then I'm just going to start taking. I'm just going to even this body out with my thread. Did not do a good job with this even body. So much for proportions. That's okay though. So once we tied in our chenille, everyone has their chenille tied in. So now we're just going to advance our thread to the head of the fly. So now our thread is sitting at the head there. So now what we're going to do is we have this chenille, and we're going to take touching wraps all the way up the hook shank. Just wrapping it. Make sure the wraps are touching side by side, all the way up until we reach there. And just a reminder, I'm holding the chenille, not the thread, right? Yeah. I could see myself making that mistake as a beginner. Yeah, so it's just take it all the way up to the end, and I'm going to zoom out a bit to show you what I'm doing. I'm just holding it tight with my fingers. Good. So now I'm just going to take my left hand and throw the bobbin over the chenille a couple times. Just throw it over a couple times, and that'll secure it. So now this chenille is locked in. It's not going to unravel or anything. So now what we're going to do, we'll throw a couple wraps. We'll pull this tag end of chenille back, put a couple wraps in front of it. Just one or two, nothing much, just to secure it in. Now this is being secured in really well now. Good stuff. So now we're just going to trim this tag end of chenille off. Honestly, this would catch fish right there. But what we're going to do to make it a classic woolly bugger is we're going to take some hackle. So hackle is a general term referring to feathers of a rooster or a hen or any other bird, pretty much. We use all sorts of birds, ducks, chickens. nothing has our mercy as fly tires. Pheasants, yeah. So this is strung rooster hackle. So we're just gonna select so there's so many different fibers here, right? There's so many different feathers, and we only want one. So we're gonna pick a pretty average size one. I would say something like that. One way that you can actually test the size of your hackle is just by holding it and bracing it against your hook like that. So then now you can see the fibers of the feather are splayed out, right? And you can measure it relative to the rest of your fly. So this is actually a good length right here. You want your hackle fibers to be approximately 1.5 to 2 times the hook gap. So this is the hook gap from the point here to the shank, the point here to the shank. We're just going to measure this feather, pull it up against, and our fibers are approximately 1.5 times that length, right? So this is just a neat trick for you to use. This feather, we're going to go over the anatomy. At its bottom here, we have some of this fluffy stuff, right? This material is very similar to the marabou. We don't want that. So what we can do is just strip it down. Strip it down the stem, and that will effectively remove that stuff. So I'm going to do it on both sides. I'm going to remove all that fluffy stuff. Approximately the bottom 2 inches of the feather, I'm going to remove. I'm actually going to strip off a few feathers because, as you can tell here, the fibers at the bottom, oh, sorry, it's bending all over the place. The fibers at the bottom of the feather are longer than the fibers at the tip. So I measured it just now, and those feathers are a little long for my liking. So I'm just going to strip down a little bit more to reach some of the shorter fibers. And now I'm up here. I like that. I like the length of those fibers a lot better. They're approximately 1.5 to 2 times the length of the gap of the hook. So this is just stripping off feathers from the bottom. Don't strip too much. I'd rather you have some more feather to work with than less. But if you remove the bottom 2 inches-ish, you should be fine. So now we have bare stem. So in the fly tying world, we refer to this as bare stem, and we refer to this as the hackle portion that we're wrapping. So we like to tie in bare stem because it's clean and it's easier to wrap. So let me zoom in here. So this is still the feather, nothing special. I'm going to take my left hand. I'm going to point the tip to the back with the fly. I'm going to take my left hand and hold it just like that. Okay. So same thing as we wrapped in the marabou. Then we're just going to take a couple wraps to go over it. So now this is secured pretty well. This is not going anywhere. If you want, pull that tag end back, put a couple wraps in front, that really lock it in. Okay, so now we're just going to come in with our scissors. The bare stem part, the one that we stripped, we're just going to come in and trim it off cleanly at the base. So now we just remove the stem of that fiber, right? Or the feather. Now this is it's gonna get a little funky. I will warn you. So now we're just gonna work our thread to the back to where we tied it in. We're gonna go over the chenille, just spiral wraps, open spiral, take 2 or 3 wraps, 4 maybe, to the base. You don't want to take like those really tight touching wraps, right? Because we want to let the chenille do its thing, stay fluffy like that. So now we're going to use these trusty little hackle pliers. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So we see this tip of the feather, right? This is a little bit difficult to hold and wrap with. What we're just gonna do is we're gonna pinch it, open it, and then grab the end of our feather.
Okay.
So it just gives us something to hold on to, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm gonna zoom in a little bit again so you can see the fly. Oops, there we go. So now we're just gonna wrap our way down. So we're gonna take approximately 5 to 6 open spiral wraps all the way down. So we're gonna start off, before you guys start wrapping, I want you to do one complete turn around the head of the fly first.
Okay.
And then start working our way down. 5 to 6 wraps. Okay, so now we're just holding, we wanna keep tension, right? So I'm gonna show you, I switched hands with my hackle pliers actually. So originally I was wrapping with my right hand, now I switch hands to my left. Okay, so I'm just holding it here with tension. Now my thread is at the base here, right? I'm gonna zoom back in again so you can see. Let's get it in focus for you. So my thread is at the base here, right? I'm gonna take a few wraps at the base over the tip of that hackle. 1, 2, okay? So now I've effectively fixed this tip in there, right? Carl, you got that?
Yes.
Carl, you got that?
Yep.
Okay, so now we're gonna come in with our scissors and we gotta be really careful, okay? We're gonna isolate this tip and we're just gonna trim it out. Just using the tip of our scissors to trim it out. Just try not to cut any of the other materials. It's a little difficult because there's a lot of stuff going on there, but you guys should be able to do it fine. Yeah, okay, good. So now we need to work our thread back to the front of the fly. So we're going to take 4 to 5 open spiral wraps all the way up, but we don't just want to go at it like this, right? Because if I went at it like this, you see how many of those fibers I'm like locking down if I just wrap like that? What I want to do is I kind of want to wiggle my thread through those fibers all the way up the shank of the hook. Work my way back to the head. And this way, I'm kind of wrapping over the stem of the hackle with my thread, and I'm reinforcing it. And then once we get to the head, just use your fingers, stroke all the fibers back, and then take a wrap. So just stroke all those fibers back. We're going to use the whip finisher, and we're going to finish the head of our fly. We're going to tie a knot, because if we just cut it now, all that thread would unravel, right? And then our fly would fall apart, and that's not what we want. We want to tie a knot there. So what we're going to do is we have our bobbin in our left hand, following along. Bobbin in our left hand. We're going to come up with our whip finisher, hook, like this, Carl. Roll, everything okay there? Good. Then we're going to come around the bend, around the indent, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Pull it out, bring it up to the assembly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and then we're just going to push our triangle away from us. We're going to push up. Get that thread off of the hook, off of the indent there.
Okay.
So all I did was move the whip finisher up a bit, and then it slipped off the indent. Yeah? Okay, now I'm going to pull with my left hand, and then it's going to bring that hook into there, okay? Slowly, slowly, slowly. And then once we're there, we'll take that hook out. We're going to come in with our scissors and just trim that thread out. There you have it. You just tied your first fly.
And that was our first class, so we went over all the basic fly tying tools and we tied one of the most effective patterns ever invented, the woolly bugger. Please subscribe and like the video and stay tuned for more of our classes as we take our participants along the journey of fly tying.